I think we started the conversations with innovations, technologies, applications, and how these things can actually help the country to just face healthcare, or else integrate smart healthcare solutions into the people's hand. So in the end of the day, none of these things actually working if we can't actually let masses to be able to use these technologies. So moving on with the conversation, we have a wonderful panel today, and one of the key things I wanted to dig down is how he's actually working on the ground. So I would start with Chandima and start the conversation off with from your experience working at HEMAS and also in ayubo.life right now, what are the key challenges that you think that the country has, or else developing countries have for this digitalization of healthcare systems?
Sure, everyone. Good to be here and speaking to you and everyone here. So I think, so at Taibo as well as from HEMA's point of view, we had the opportunity of actually working with both the private sector as well as the government sector. So interestingly, actually, with my personal experience so far in the healthcare side of things, actually, we found Ministry of Health having a long-term view of things. They are clear on the problems that they want to solve, and they have been very flexible in terms of creating opportunities for private sector players to come and address some specific issues. I think in terms of creating a more broader digital health kind of infrastructure and environment, I think overall we need to change our mindsets, and this has to happen within the private sector as well. So because even when we created ayubo.life, the whole objective was to put the user at the center and bring more and more data points to that user so that he or she is empowered to take care of life. But in terms of creating multiple hospitals into a single platform where the data gets shared has been a challenge. So each hospital feels that particular user is a customer of theirs, and they don't want that data to be easily transferable across different medical institutions. So I think the first thing is, I think we need to change our mindsets, and I think put the user or the each individual at the center. So that's number one. I think number two is around the technology proliferation. Although we have so many people using smartphones, but each user uses it in kind of different ways. I think people are familiar with kind of the Facebook, but beyond that, there are limitations maybe in the phones that they use, because not all smartphones are equal. So we need to recognize some of these challenges and then kind of adopt the right technologies, maybe certain cut-down versions, and target different segments in terms of matching their own problems to the solutions that we have, which I think is still evolving, because I think even the main digital health players, which is probably about 5 or 6 of us, we are still at that early stage. We are still capturing the kind of the urban population. So there's still headroom to grow within that. I think the whole COVID scenario has accelerated that journey for many of us. But I think it's time that we go beyond that to attract the next starters of the society. We had I think we were fortunate to do some interesting work with the Ministry of Health. As you know, ayubo is focused more on the preventative side of health. That's our prime focus, about creating healthier nations, as we call it. To create kind of a setup which is like a health check station, self check station. So you go in, there's some simple tests to be done. You have a weighing scale, and everything gets onto a back-end system, which actually calculates a risk score based on cardiovascular and diabetes, and gives some advice. So this is getting implemented in the government departments. So that is a very low budget way of doing it. But what it does is actually it gives the initial information to someone if there's a future risk, so that you can take some action. So I think just to summarize, I think in terms of your question, we can keep discussing this, but I think the main thing that we need to have is a change in the mindset. I think as we saw, like I think what Zohan has done, I mean, he has created a great infrastructure, and I think he's also waiting for hospitals to get ready to get better connected. He's ready waiting for police to get better connectivity. So I think that connectivity becomes important. I think that's more of a mindset change. I think that is required. And I'm sure the technology and businesses will follow that.
Thank you, Chandima. I think you brought up like, two key points, right? So one is like, the mindset. And then the second thing is like healthcare is not like a very simple system. It's a very complex system where that different type of nodes are getting involved to be able to make it work together. So passing on to Dulani, right? Being in the business development as a business development executive, where you have deep technology and to be able to connect these deep technologies into like organizations or institutes. So what are the challenges that you are facing in terms of launching proof of concepts? Because in the beginning, one of the things that we need to do is to be able to create a proof of concept and launch a pilot. And so that way, like we can prove that the technology that we are proposing is helping like the system to have like, better outcome. So one of my key questions is, what are the challenges that you are facing like daily to be able to launch proof of concepts like within this complex structure of like, organizations?
Thank you, Biman. So moving on to your question, I think one of the like proof of concept is essential to validate an idea. We all know that it's like more of an understanding of what your project is all about. So I think one of the challenges or one of the key factors you need to look at is the team who is working on the particular invention. So in my opinion, a team in place and its dynamic impact the whole process. So whatever the idea or the technology you come up with, the team who is working on that particular POC should be really good. So I'll just brief you on SLINTEC. That like SLINTEC having 50 to 60 research scientists and engineers looking at various aspects of research. But that itself, I think, is not enough, because not only the technical knowledge you need, but various other aspects of knowledge is really required. So I think for this you need collaboration. The power of collaboration is really required. So other important factor, I think, is funding to develop a particular POC. Like when something is in ideation level, like nobody is willing to take a risk and take that to the next level. So as a research institute, we are trying to collaborate with international parties, demand and seek for grant opportunities at the same time. So just to give you an example, actually Heminda also pointed out this. I will not go into details. So at SLINTEC, we recently developed this method called RT lamp kit, which is a kit which we can detect COVID-19 virus in less time compared to the existing method in Sri Lanka. So initially how this method started was like a group of scientists from SLINTEC collaborated with the European community. So initial idea was developed at SLINTEC. So to validate method, we had to collaborate with a local university to conduct the clinical trial. So there you go, you have the collaboration there. So we even got the GMP license to manufacture this kit locally. So now we are about to set up a joint venture with a private sector company in Sri Lanka with this RT lamp kit. So I think with the proof of concept stage is very helpful in sharing the vision by collaboration and with a good team while obtaining the required funding. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. I think like, you answered it like, very effectively. And one of the things that like, requires like a great team to be able to pull something off with low resource setting. And developing countries like Sri Lanka, thinking that like, how we creatively find these opportunities and then create opportunities inside the country to integrate advanced technology development into current systems. So after a POC is like developed, like there's another long journey from making like your venture successful or else like the product successful, right? So I think that's where Dr. Rangika is bringing quite a lot of experience with technology transfer and like handling IP and all these kind of like related issues around it. So one of my key questions to you, Dr. Rangika, is that when you look at healthcare specifically, what is the roadmap for commercialization? Because in the end of the day, doing pilots is not actually sustainable. So what type of like commercialization strategies that you found effective for developing countries like us working with multiple different organizations to help this actually deliver to like masses?
Thanks, everyone. Good evening to everyone. So when we start with the project, so the most important part is the concept. So if you look at the entire cradle to grave process of a tech commercialization, you start with an idea. So first of all, so you have to make sure that idea is something worthwhile exploring. So then when it comes to idea generation, so there's always like a need and a requirement, and you have to bridge that technology gap. So that's you have to do with your experience in terms of the technology and the competency. And then that's how you build up your technology from there onwards. So then one of the key strategies or one of the key tools that you can adopt is the technology readiness level. So in the technology readiness level, like it's a strategy, or it's rather a concept developed by NASA back in the day. So it's something that they came up with to understand the position of the technology and the readiness of the technology. So for example, technology readiness level 0 or TRL 0 is the ideation level. Then like you do lab work, or then like in an industry, like in a service oriented operation, it could be like coding based. Then when you do prototyping and so on, so you move up on the ladder. So for example, like you start with TRL1, which is the lab related work and coding related work. Then you go on to TRL2, which is the proof of concept that Dulani and you were talking about. And then like you go to TRL3 and 4, so on. So that's the prototyping and beyond that. So usually when you hit to the prototyping stage, so you should have a very good understanding in terms of the direction that you are heading in terms of the commercialization. And also at that point of time, it's always recommended to secure your IP. So when it comes to securing IP, like you can have different strategies in terms of whether to like go for a local IP, go for an international IP. Like then always you can start with a like you can start with a low expenses, like going for a local IP, and then like to try to bank on a different avenue based on the commercial appetite that you get. So then once you secure your IP, then the next step would be to do the validation and scale up work. So obviously, like once you go beyond the prototyping stage, so you have to have third-party validations. So that's where like a lot of regulatory bodies come into play. Like that's where you have to get a lot of endorsements, and you have to have third-party validations to say that your product is working, especially in the healthcare sector, healthcare innovation. So you have to have those sort of validations. Then once you go beyond that, like TRL 7, 8 and so on would be on pilot setup, then scaling up your operations, running commercial level quantities and things like that. So if you look at this entire cradle to grave cycle, so that's only one aspect of it. So that's just the technology aspect. But then again, like you have to look at the other aspect, which is the marketing aspect. So when you take the technology and marketing, so it always go hand in hand. So we call it as like yin and yang. So you have to have the technology, so which working technology. But then again, although having a working technology won't take your product to the market, so it won't have legs to go alone. So you have to have a good marketing strategy. You have to have a good business model. So that's something we have to focus always. So like again, the business model relates back to the ideation stage. So at the ideation stage, we have to make sure the project that we pick to do, project that we embark to do, should have legs to go a global mileage. It shouldn't be concentric to Sri Lanka. It shouldn't be a Me Too product. So it has to be something quite big in terms of that aspect. So if you get all these elements right, then you can go towards the commercialization targets. So that's the most important part. So like when you always look at when you always come up with a innovation for a problem, so you have to see through the entire process to make sure that you go the extra mile. So otherwise, like you may find certain stumbling blocks, you may find certain bottlenecks. So in order to mitigate those, so you can go through the TRL, the technology readiness level protocol. So that will actually help anyone to clarify a lot of roadblocks that you may face in the technology commercialization avenue.
Thank you, Rangika. I think you answered the question really well. There's quite a lot of steps that you need to go through, and in the early stage of the validation, also you need to start thinking of business models, start thinking of sustainability, and think about partnerships and collaborations that helps you scale at some point. And so this brings us to another interesting different question, because I think part of the Good City Foundation, the people that were working on these solutions are fairly young, and that also is another thing. That means people, because when you work on traditional systems that have not been evolved for a long time, so especially healthcare is a very traditional system that relies on doctors, and then that relies on very skilled work, and introducing digitalization on top of such kind of traditional model always have bottlenecks, and it always have problems around communicating, especially same way that the doctors don't expect same way doctors don't expect us to understand technology, understand diseases, and to do a surgery on the table. Same way there's a huge communication gap in terms of digital literacy also at some point. So one of the questions that I have for Dulani, moving back, is from your experience, has your gender and has your age affected in terms of doing this or reaching out to partners, or else have you seen it becoming a bottleneck where that young people are talking about digital infrastructures like industry 4.0 technologies, or else this smart materials and stuff like that? So have you seen that becoming a bottleneck in terms of commercialization and partnerships?
Am I audible? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, well, so I have not come across a situation as such, Biman, but however, I think the gender should not be a problem when developing strategies or communicating any of these things you mentioned. So, in my opinion, there should be a gender balanced workforce in an organization. And also, in terms of age, I think it's all about the experience and knowledge we gain throughout the years of working. And different individuals have a different unique capacities. So, and also, I think it's better to have an open communication culture within an organization. So it helps to help bridge the gap between different age limits between employees. So working in a group, it enables individuals to be more involved in developing strategies and communications, regardless of their sex or the age.
Wonderfully answered, Dulani. So
Yeah.
what about cross culture, cross organizations, or else what about working with governments, or what about working with different entities? That what type of strategies are the best way? For example, for let's say we have group of young individuals in the audience, and then if they have innovative solutions in healthcare, where that they want to go and discuss this with relevant organizations, what type of strategies that have you seen being practical, useful, and effective?
You mean in terms of business development and
Yes,
yeah.
Let's say launching a pilot with Ministry of Health.
Okay, so I'll answer that. So in a research institute like SLINTEC, Biman, we have focused all our resources to create technologies which will solve the pressing issues in the industry. So in terms of business development, the projects we are doing, we can call it blue sky projects, where the projects are internally or self-funded, and the contract research projects which are client or the government funded. You just mentioned like that. So, and also the strategic research are also there, which are funded by the state ministries. So even these internally funded projects, Biman, when these come to a certain maturity stage, I think we are seeking for collaborators or investors to take this project to a next level. So by doing contract research projects, we are just covering the cost incurred during the research phase. That's also an investment we do internally. So however, the real income generation is either through a licensing or a royalty agreement with parties. So I think Dr. Rangika will also add into this. So as an example, I'll tell you, so I think Biman also pointed out this, we developed a smart mask sensor at SLINTEC. So for this particular invention, initially we partnered up with a company in China to come up with a proof of concept. So but the market for these type of sensors locally, you can't find it, and finding a local investor would have been really hard. So what we did was we partnered up with a Sri Lankan apparel company to create a smart mask with respiration sensor technology. So they are taking this invention to the global market. So I think research and development activities should be carefully planned. Even the pilot you mentioned, that there's a cost incurred to that. So managed from the inception of the idea to commercialization should be carefully planned. And so also getting it right from the very beginning will lead to business stability, investment security, and also the long-term profit.
Thank you, Dulani. I think that helps us to move on to and you guys can hear me clearly, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So that actually helps us to move on to with someone like who's much experience in the space. And for moving to you, Chandima, right? One of the things that I wanted to ask and drill down is pandemic is the first of many disasters that we are waiting to face. And then pre-COVID systems that were built in let's say non-communicable diseases, right, has drastically changed over time. And I think especially in mental health space also, the countries are not equipped with enough psychiatrists or else enough support to be able to take care of the problems that gonna come after the post pandemic. So even though people are vaccinated, people are wearing masks, and somehow everything comes back to normal, the mental health is another part that is going to be extremely affected. And what are the challenges and what are the immediate solutions that you think developing countries should be preparing for in an individual level or the healthcare system level for a post-pandemic world?
Yeah, I think what we call post-pandemic is still a few, probably a couple of years away. Because as we have seen, I think the behavior of this virus with the new variants coming and all of that, it's a changing landscape. And we may well get into a way that this is going to get into a couple of years. Maybe we do the 2 vaccinations. There may be another annual thing that may be required. Then we will also have a country with different types of vaccination given to different people reacting to these things differently, certain complications coming for different people for these vaccinations. And I think so the immediate thing is I think we need to kind of make sure that this information gets systemized. I know it's certain places it got into computer systems straight away, certain locations it was pen and paper, but I know the records are there, but I hope that it'll get into a central system so that we know who has got which vaccine and when. So we also have a batch of people, including myself, who got the first vaccine of first dose of AstraZeneca, and we are not sure when we will get the second dose. I mean, nothing to do with the Sri Lankan government or any one of us. It's because of the Indian situation, something that could not be planned for, and I'm sure there'll be alternatives. But all these things need to get into systems so that we know, first of all, where we stand, and then as we go along, we need to understand how people react to these things and the effectiveness. I don't think we still do tests around effectiveness. So at some point we need to start that. to look at antibodies and all of that, and start documenting that, so we know that what we are taking is effective as a population where we are, and that will have to become like part of the kind of the risk management at a country health level, which I'm sure like they're already planning. But as you said, I think this whole conversation around mental health has escalated across the country, especially in the corporate sector. I think corporate sector is kind of bringing this to light, but I think the problem itself is across the country, because it had multiple dimensions of stresses on people in terms of limitations, in terms of what they can do, being in one place. There's financial pressure. There are lots of, whether it's salary cuts or economical pressure for certain jobs and vocations. Then also like your family members becoming vulnerable or going through this condition. So that itself is creating a lot of stress for a lot of people. And I don't think we are really geared to handle this at two levels. One is, again, kind of this how we look at mental health. I think from most developing countries, we are still at a stage that if someone needs mental health help, we think he's like almost like beyond repair. That's like a last resort. Whereas I think in the more developed countries, this has got into kind of more counseling and accepted as an essential part of life, just like the healthcare that we look at. I mean, just like exercising for the body. I mean, you need someone to help condition your mind, understand where you stand better, have those open dialogues, and get some guidance. So that aspect, I mean, we have lines for people who are suicidal, but I think we need a lot of education to get people to talk about this openly and have these lines open for people who are generally stressed. I think, especially our generation, think it's a weakness if we can't handle stress. I think the younger generation is a lot better in accepting, okay, they need help and they call for help a lot earlier. So that's one thing. And the second thing is if and when people open up, whether we have the capacity, and I think that's where technology can play a role. We've also already seen, like even within ayubo, when you look at during pandemic anyway, the telehealth usage goes up, I think globally. We saw the same thing. But if you look at during like the better times where you can actually go to the hospitals, what kind of doctor-patient combination stay within telehealth? Actually, it was in mental health, because I think the telehealth within mental health space actually addresses a couple of issues. One thing is that with kind of the bandwidth supporting video-based consultation, I think that eye contact and body language, everything is now visible. And the second thing is you're not actually nobody's going to see you going into a particular chamber of a particular doctor. So that's a good thing. So there's better privacy and confidentiality. And people don't have to really postpone this. Within a few minutes, you can get an appointment. You can approach a doctor a lot more earlier than kind of waiting for some condition to really get into a severe state. So I think mental health, I think digital health has a evolving role within the mental health, addressing that. Did I answer your question completely?
I think, yeah, Chandima, you answered it like, in multiple different tiers. So one of the things like, that I was very interested and intrigued by, like what you mentioned is that countries and people need to take mental health seriously the same way as like, physical health also. So at the same time, it needs to be designed in such a way that you can have a conversation with a psychiatrist or else like someone, or to be able, like the technology has evolved like, in many layers. So the same technology platforms that we used, let's say 10 years ago and like now has like, drastically evolved, giving people access to even companies like Calm or Headspace, like, using content to be able to help people to calm down.
Sure.
So, and whether those content are in like, because everyone is not like proficient in English, so that whether those content are being like localized into languages and they're effective, and then the mainstream media is actually using these platforms and airtime to be able to help to people to calm down. And another thing, like, with all these conversations come into the play is, again, because the whole point of putting the panel together was to understand with multiple different points of view to see what are the difficult challenges that, like, we are facing in implementing these things in real situation. So one of the things that I wanted to ask from from Rangika and Dulani together is, how long do you think it takes in a developing country to implement a solution that is, let's say, like digital and novel into a traditional system? So what is the timeline that you've seen that actually something can be integrated into like a system?
Well, Viman, it really depends on the type of the innovation. So if it's an innovation, something to do with medical field, so like say for example, that technologies that you were talking about. So if you have to do something like that, so it takes quite a lot of time because you have to do clinical validation. So the clinical validation itself takes about 6 months to 8 months or beyond that, depending on the type of the work that you want to do, and also get the regulatory clearance in terms of, like in Sri Lanka, it's NMRA, and then there are few other regulatory bodies. So you have to go through that process to get the clearance in order to put the product out. So minimum it would take about 1.5 years at least to like from the inception of the project to put it out. But then again, it can be expedited, like say if you go through different channels, like say for example, like rather than going it through the Sri Lankan process, like if you go through FDA process, like there are expedite fast tracks procedures for the FDA. So then like getting FDA endorsement and coming back to Sri Lanka would sometimes it might be a complementary thing for our regulatory bodies to assess and give the endorsements. So there are a few things like that. But then again, like say if you are doing something non-related to medical industry, so in that case, so it all depends on the team that you have around. So like in that case, like there are no restrictions at all. So like for example, if you take the mass sensor that we did, so our turnaround time is about 6 months altogether. So for projects like that, there are no restrictions as such. But like when it comes to medical clearance, the process is quite stringent in Sri Lanka in terms of getting the endorsement and clearance.
So, and Dulani, like one of the questions that I have around this topic is that for digitalization healthcare projects, do they have the same timeline? For example, let's say that one of the things that we are having commonly done is for COVID-19 patients is to monitor the blood oxygen level. So blood oxygen monitors have been there for a long time, and then again, that's just is a simple integration of IoT connectivity, so that with the central dashboard you can see what is the patient's blood oxygen level. And even though it doesn't give you let's say a 99.99% accuracy of a patient's condition, but it's better than nothing, rather than just sitting in front and counting and use heavily equipped different very expensive machines. There's a simpler ways of getting a baseline when you don't have hospitals. Now shelters are being turned into hospitals, or else hotel rooms are getting turned into hospitals.
Yeah.
This kind of a situation, Chandima and Dulani both, what type of challenges that you are facing in order to integrate these solutions into let's say evolving healthcare systems, especially where that you need to digitalize them to be able to monitor them carefully?
I think I'll let Chandima answer that question better than me. I think he'll be able to answer that.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think couple of challenges. I think I've had this conversation with multiple people. I think so. Especially the private sector. I mean, these are all commercial organizations, and they are profit oriented, even if they're in healthcare. So the question comes: okay, who's going to pay for what, and what kind of problems they actually want to solve as well. So even if you take this simple thing around, okay, do you want to monitor something that again around healthcare, the issue is around the responsibility. I mean, ultimately, if you are keeping someone within your care, I mean, you are overall responsible. And whether they're going to depend on a measure coming off a device, I mean, at this point, I mean, we can essentially access only like home-based or home grade equipment. So whether they're going to make decisions or rely on something like that, I mean, that becomes a point of debate across doctors and whether they are happy to take responsibility. So that's on the kind of the official side of things. But I mean, unofficially, like right now, what's happening is everyone is asking, okay, what's your blood saturation? So everyone is buying these pulse oximeters from Daraz and keeping one at home. So I think sometimes we are short-sighted on these things. Sometimes we look for that kind of perfect solution. But whereas in an evolving scenario, we may need to figure out, okay, what's available in the market, what's at the right price point, and configure something and say, okay, in 60% of the cases, this is good enough for us. So I think if you find a CEO or a head of medical services that kind of understands that and accepts that, then you can move fast. If not, I mean, then unless your own organization is happy to take that risk and get it going, it kind of gets stuck in conversations. So I think, yeah. So I think like, and also I think people also find it difficult to read the situations. Because even I read it completely wrong like 2 months ago with the vaccinations coming. Everyone thought, okay, it's going to settle, and even I was not really looking to invest in this. I mean, we had multiple discussions as well. But now today we feel, okay, if we had that solution, if we had readiness, if we had some devices ready for demonstrations here, maybe people will capture that lot faster.
I think, Chandam, it's all time cost, risk analysis, and regulatory when it comes to health, digitalization of healthcare. And we've gone over 15 minutes, but thank you so much for the panel and the time that you guys have given us to share your valuable knowledge. And we'll conclude the panel, but we do have some questions from the audience. So I'll start from Sohan. So we have a question to Sohan that based on your experience, could you please share your opinion? What is the possibility of developing one single platform linking all emergency services such as fire emergency, police, ambulance, etc. in Sri Lanka?
It will take some time, Biman, but it is happening. So, for example, I never thought I'll be able to link up with disaster management, but we did it. Also, at the moment, we are in discussion with the fire services. So it will not happen tomorrow, but it's in the process. So let's hope with this pandemic, a lot of things have fast tracked. We can see that. So with that, and even for example, we never thought we could link up with the Health Ministry 1390 to send data to us through an API, which is now happening. So these were things 2-3 years ago, it was only a dream. But now it's in the fast track. So within the next 3-4 years, at least, a lot of things will be, the emergency services will come into a one platform. And some of the discussions we had with some of the officials, they also have these things in their project portfolio.
I think that actually answers quite a lot of work that you've been doing in the background to be able to link this up. And moving into Hemind, we have a question that is the interest of Sri Lanka's government and the community in nanotech sufficient? What's your experience compared to the movement in international context?
I think when you look at the institute itself, Sri Lanka Institute of Nanotechnology, the premier science and technology initiative, and the amount of money that is put in by the government, it's closer to about 9 billion Sri Lankan rupees. I think Sri Lankan government has really focused on nanotechnology as a major area for scientific exploration in the country. So I think in that sense, I think government has done a lot into this particular area, nanotechnology, because I currently speak to a lot of organizations globally, especially in the US. And when I see, I mean, you have to put it into context, the Sri Lankan economy, the Sri Lankan numbers versus the amount of money the government has put. I think in that sense, I think the Sri Lankan government has really focused a lot on this area. I think that's has to be commended, especially there's a lot of other areas that need government support in science and technology. Compared to that, there's a lot of emphasis is given to nanotechnology area.
I think on top of that, like, we have like another 2 questions for myself also. I think the government has like, invested quite a bit, like, nanotechnology and healthcare services also, especially fast tracked during pandemic. That helps like, both Sohan's and like, Heminder's arguments. And also the question that I have for like, myself is regarding the vocal biomarkers to detect depression. Is the technology being used anywhere at the moment, or it's still at the development phase? Also inform application in third-party platforms. So we've actually like, developed and launched it in China. So there are 2 versions. One is like, because you need to go through clinical trials to be able to integrate it in a hospital level. So which is the CFDA in China. So we've applied for CFDA, and we are getting like the CFDA in November or December this year. And right now the platform is like, running in multiple different partnerships with local governments, and also in China, and also a platform called ICOM. So they're like the biggest healthcare providers in the country to help like, quickly assess people with emotional distress, and purely using like, voice and a combination of like PHQ-9 tests. And the second question is from also for me, how reliable and safe the smart healthcare solutions in preventing unnecessary assessments and unnecessary respiratory conditions, and also in a simplicity as well as a substitute of natural mechanisms such as breathing fresh air directly from the environment. So this question has 2 parts. When it comes to like, preventing unnecessary assessments, that's where like, you need to go through the regulatory bodies to be able to pass certain benchmarks, tests, and to be able to publish actively globally, so that your technology is actually being like validated by researchers, and also like, validated by like, many other parties. And when it comes to like, integrating these in commercial products, all these commercial products have standards. So you need to follow these like, certifications and standards to be able to integrate these in commercial technology products. For example, like if you're launching even a mask for say with a sensor together, you still have to go through like the entire clearing of certificates of filtration to efficiency, also like, the positive air pressure and breathability, the fabrics quality, and also like, the sensors have to go through the whole GDPR policies and data protection privacy laws, and CEF, ROHS, or all those kind of like, certifications are required to be able to like, commercially sell it. And then on top of it, like, when it comes to natural mechanisms, like, I don't think we live in a world where that right now we only cared about pollution, or else like, wearing a face mask before for us was like a dust mask. Now, if we are not wearing it properly, or else like, if there's a zero leakage, like, it's like if there's a leakage that's happening, you are still evolved for, you are still like, endangered to be able to like, coast. So you can think of it as like, even respirative equipment. So a normal person need to wear a mask. And if we are using the normal, let's say like a surgical mask, you should be like, replacing. So for 1 month, you need at least 127 masks. So what people do is that they don't follow the proper way of using respirative equipment because they don't even know how to use it. So one of those key things is that simple integration of technology can help people to understand like, whether they are using these devices properly or they're abusing it. Even if you're like taking a, let's say a mask with like antibacterial coating, what happens is every time you wash it, that coating goes away. So you need to know, like, when to even wash it, so that you increase the lifespan of the product that you're using. So most of these things are assistive technologies that helps you to just, like, helps you to, like, use the products properly. And with that question, I think I'll hand the floor to Andre and Malit to wrap up the session.